Good morning and happy Wednesday. Welcome to this week's edition of the Sports Curious Podcast. It's our Wednesday Wisdom edition, obviously on a Wednesday. Here to join me to talk all about the Paralympics, which is going to be such an exciting event. We're coming off the Olympic high. We're rolling into football season, rolling into Paralympics. We have a lot going on, and it's really, really exciting that we get to add this to our list. Scott, thank you for joining me for today's podcast. And if you don't know, Scott is my co-host, my co-founder of last night's game, and of course, my favorite brother.
And your only brother, so hopefully I'm my favorite. Thank you for having me. Excited to talk about the Paralympics. Just when you thought you were getting over lack of sleep and overwhelming patriotism for our United States athletes, we get roped right back in for the Paralympics. And there's so much to talk about and so many incredible athletes to highlight. So it's exciting.
It's really incredible. When we were talking through notes ahead of us recording, there's so much happening. There's so much to learn, so much. I mean, it's incredible. And just like the Olympics, I will probably tear up at every single medal ceremony. Every time someone wins and they go and hug their mom. I mean, it's like there's a tearjerker.
I mean, there's no difference in winning and the emotions that come along with it, especially for us sitting on the couch watching.
Yeah, I mean, it's really easy for me to tear up sitting on my couch at 9 p.m. in the evening with a cup of tea. But, same. I sweat a little less, but I'm still just as emotional.
Yes, and like Olympic athletes overcome so many things to compete. And these athletes overcome even more, and their strength of will is just incredible to watch. So I'm excited.
I am too. So we're going to talk through some of the sports, but first I want to set a little bit of a baseline for people who are not familiar with watching the Paralympics. So basically the IPC, which is the International Paralympic Committee, recognizes 3 categories of impairments for eligible participation in the sports. They include physical impairment, intellectual impairment, and vision impairment. And within these categories, 10 specific types of eligible impairments, such as impaired muscle power, limb deficiency, vision impairment, are identified. So it kind of just gives you an idea of what we're talking about here. It sets us all up on the same page. We've got Team USA rolling in with a huge team as expected. I mean, we have 22 sports, 549 medal events, excuse me. And Team USA is rolling in big.
There's 4,400 athletes overall throughout the world. USA's coming in strong with, I think it's 225 total athletes, equal men and women, 110 men, 110 women, and then there's 5 guides that are part of the team as well that we'll kind of get into later throughout the podcast. Team USA is rolling in hot.
That's right. And it's pretty cool that 78 members of Team USA are making their debut. And then we have 141 who are returning. What's really cool is 52 of those returning athletes have previously won Paralympic medals. So Team USA is coming in really prepared for another great showing. Hopefully they'll set the record just like the Olympics.
I think we have a few athletes going on their 6th overall Olympics, if I'm not mistaken, for Team USA, which is pretty remarkable. There are some athletes that participate both in Winter and Summer Olympics, which is, absolutely incredible. So some of the most dominant athletes in their sport, like Oksana Masters, I think we've probably watched her over the past few Olympics, winter and summer. So definitely leading the way.
It's pretty cool. What else is really cool is, so if you remember from the Olympics, there was, through Project Gold, the U.S. athletes get $37,500 for winning a gold medal, $22,500 for silver, and $15,000 for bronze. And that holds up through the Paralympics as well. So they will also receive those medal bonuses, which are not taxed. Remember, we talked about the victory tax that was passed a couple years ago, said that these Olympians are not taxed, like it's a bonus.
I mean, if you're winning medals for our country, you shouldn't have to pay tax for them with the amount of pride and patriotism you bring. So that's good to see. And like we said, we spoke about in some of our Olympic episodes, not all these athletes are professionals. $37,500 for a gold is massive.
Absolutely, because as you sort of mentioned, the training and the money that goes into their training and their time is significant. And very few athletes competing in the Olympics or Paralympics are professionals, right? I think we had women's and men's basketball and maybe a couple soccer players, and then some of the women's soccer players. Like, there's not a lot of professionals that play in the Olympics and Olympic sports. So it's cool to see that that is consistent throughout both games. And then we have 38 states represented on the U.S. roster, with obviously California in the lead at 27, Illinois, which also ranked pretty high in the Olympics as well, 14 athletes, Texas 12, Pennsylvania and Washington both with 11. So it's quite a well-rounded group representing 38 states. So pretty cool.
Yeah, got kind of shocked to see Illinois up there because it's not very high up on the list for Summer Olympics. So it's great to see they're having some representation in the Paralympics.
Shout out to you, Illinois. We see you. Now, one of the cool things that is consistent is Olympic Village. So they clean out the Olympic Village from the Olympics and the Olympians, and they kind of retrofit it for the Paralympics, which is pretty cool. And then after the Paralympics, they will then turn those village apartments into basically housing for people of Paris that'll have a grocery store, schools, etc. But for right now, they have retrofitted the apartments from the Olympic Village, which originally had 14,000 beds, to 9,000 beds for the Paralympics.
And they had to adapt some of the rooms. Rooms with at least one bathroom were adapted for people with reduced mobility. And so that brought the number of beds down to 9,000. And another big change, they changed the color of the bed.
But they still have the cardboard bed. They've just changed the color of it.
Yeah, so the car beds, but they from blue to green, which is a very massive change for everyone, I'm sure.
Which I thought was interesting, that the Olympic athletes were gifted their comforters. So I'm curious, did the last person who left get the comforter, or did everyone who stayed in the room get a comforter? Because they rotate athletes out as their events start and finish in the Olympic Village. So did they all get to keep them? And then did they go home? Because those beds look like they were about like a twin extra long, like your freshman year of college.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm curious if they took those home and put them on their twin extra long beds they just happened to have in their house.
I'd hope for the last person that was there that they all got new blankets, because I don't think they'd be very fun. To be
based on what we've learned about the
is,
Olympic Village.
Yeah, and especially since the air conditioning really is non-existent, so I imagine all the sweating that took place while they slept. So hopefully everyone got their own blankets, or else it'd be pretty gross.
It would smell like man camp.
Yeah.
And one other cool thing that's coming back is going to completely decline my work ability in the next 2 weeks, which is going to have to be on par with football starting too. But when the Paralympics start on the 28th of August and run through the 8th, they will also be on GoldZone. And we all remember that GoldZone and that multi-view that they had were the huge favorite features of Peacock's Olympic coverage. So get ready for it when the games themselves begin on the 29th, opening ceremonies on the 28th. You're going to be able to access GoldZone again.
Yeah, plan your bathroom breaks accordingly, as you know, and get your work done early, because once GoldZone starts, it's impossible to get up. It's impossible to look away. And there will be one small change from GoldZone. You're not going to have guys like Scott Hansen who are getting ready for NFL Red Zone, which he's the host of. So we'll have Carolyn Mano. She's taking over the duties for GoldZone. So she'll be in there with the nonstop highlights.
That's awesome. Yeah, I didn't even really think about the guys who were on GoldZone during the Olympics are then rolling into NFL season. I didn't even think about that.
Yep. So Carolyn's stepping up and taking that initiative.
Yeah, and
keep us entertained.
That's fantastic. And I saw that she served as a sled hockey reporter in Beijing and the studio host in Sochi in 2014 through Tokyo 2020. She is ready with her 7th Olympic game assignment. So that's awesome.
Absolutely. So she's ready to go.
Okay, so let's talk a little bit. We've covered sort of the baseline, who we have, where they call home, where they're going to call home for the time being.
Mm-hmm.
Let's talk about some of these sports. The one that jumped out to both you and I, you as a former college rugby player, wheelchair rugby, which is known as murder ball. Can we talk a little bit about this? And do we want to be seeing this on the GoldZone?
You're going to see a lot of highlights from wheelchair rugby or murder ball on GoldZone, I assume. It's action-packed, it's intense, it's violent, as you can kind of take away from the nickname it's received.
It was called that way. Maybe it's a little less violent now because it says in its early days it was from the brutal collisions between the chairs. But it's pretty impressive. In wheelchair rugby, it's the only one where mixed competition is being contested. So that's pretty cool that we will have a woman representing Team USA in this discipline in the summer. This is cool.
Yep, Sarah Adams will be in the wheelchair, ramming into fellow competitors from around the world as fast as possible. And that's why collisions are so violent, because they can go full speed and just ram into each other.
Well, we should talk about that. Our most well-known Paralympic athlete is Chuck Aoki. Do you think he's related to Steve Aoki?
In a perfect world, I would say yes, but I don't believe that he is, unfortunately.
No. Okay, that'd be cool. Maybe we get some good music out of it. So he is like our most decorated, most prominent Paralympian. Maybe the wheelchair rugby team will get some pointers from Ilona Mayer. We all remember her from social media, from the bronze medal winning rugby team for Team USA.
Yeah, it's like women's rugby just was on a massive skyrocket to her popularity in the Summer Olympics. So hopefully in these Paralympics they'll kind of keep that going, and hopefully she'll jump on board, because Chuck Aoki was actually in a commercial with her, Noah Lyles, and Simone Biles for Team USA.
That's very cool. So let's talk a little bit. We talked about there's 5 guides on Team USA. And let's talk about really what that means. So there are 3 classes of visually impaired athletes. So there's T11, which are the athletes are totally blind and run with a blindfold and always run with a guide. T12, which have some vision, but they're impaired enough to choose whether they run by themselves or with a guide. And T13 are impaired but cannot use a guide. So you'll see some of our athletes running with a guide. And what that looks like is that athlete must always cross the finish line before their guide, not the other way around. So the guide is there to literally guide them, but I guess the best way to say this is it's not necessarily a coach, it's a guide.
And these guides have to be obviously fast as well, and just as great as athletes as the Paralympians, and obviously the ones with the designations, the T11, the T12, they can't necessarily see exactly where to stay in the lane. So that's why they have the guide, 1 or 2 steps behind them, making sure they're going exactly where they need to go.
And it's really interesting. So, the more we dove into this, there is blind football and goal, where those balls they're filled with, they have a bell inside that make a noise so the players can locate them. But in blind football and in goalball, all players are blindfolded to ensure that it's a fair and equal competition for all. So it's really interesting to see how they've, but also the sports are phenomenal. And when we say football, we should say soccer. It's not our version of football. It's not American football.
Clarify, it's soccer.
Yes, but one of the things that in reading through the rules is that the fans have to be quiet, because the athletes need to be able to hear the bells and the ball, because that's how they play. And so that it's not a crowd amping. You don't have your 7th player, 6th man, whatever we call it all, is not the crowd. It's I guess the ball.
Yep, to stay completely silent. And there's a guide for a long jump and track as well. So if they stand near where they're supposed to launch at clap, so the track, when they go, will also be completely silent.
Yeah. Oh, that's cool. I don't think it's a sport in the Paralympics, because it wasn't in the Olympics, but I remember working for the Diamondbacks, and we would sponsor a beep ball team. So the ball would beep, so you could hear it. And then obviously as it got louder, it was closer to you. It was it was really impressive. And to me, what a next level athlete that is, that to have to use all your different senses in order to play this sport. And it's really cool to see, and very, very impressive.
I mean, just being able to have to react off the hearing and hear the bell is truly remarkable.
It's really, really incredible. I think I'm going to dive into swimming next, because we have one athlete, Elizabeth Marks, who has done both the Invictus Games and the Paralympics. So we'll talk a little bit about that and the difference between those two in just a minute. But as we talk about para swimming, now swimmers compete in that without aid of any accessories. So you might have blades in track, wheelchairs, obviously, in wheelchair rugby. but there are no accessories no prosthesis allowed. So kind of an interesting, different thing. Talk to us a little bit about Elizabeth, who is a veteran and competing in this year's Paralympics.
I mean, there's really no one more inspirational than Elizabeth Marks being able to compete still. So in 2008, she joined the Army, and 3 years later, she sustained injuries to both hips while on assignment in Iraq, which, obviously left her mobility and things like that extremely impaired. So she took up swimming in 2016. And like you said, she won 4 golds at the Invictus Games, which is Prince Harry.
Mm-hmm.
That he puts on for veterans and active duty military that are injured and sick. And that's kind of one of the things we had to distinguish the difference between the Paralympics and Invictus Games. Was that Invictus Games were strictly for active duty military or veterans that are injured and or sick.
Yeah, and if I remember correctly, Invictus Games you have to be veterans, but I also believe, and I don't have the right wording in front of me right now, but it's from like allied nations. So it's limited to I think it's like 40 countries. But yes, they all have to be veterans, which is cool to see that people like Elizabeth can compete in both, because I think both messages are both inspiring and both incredible. So thanks to Elizabeth for her service to our country, and I can't wait to cheer her on. That's really cool.
And she said she had an incredible qualifying time, so she set a bunch of records. So 2024 should be her year to dominate.
And you may have mentioned it, but maybe not. She also took
So she's got a lot of experience under her belt, and she's obviously just an incredible athlete and inspirational human being.
Now that the Olympics and the Paralympics too happen in the same location. 1988, Olympic and Paralympic Games have been in the same city and in the same venues. But really, I mean, originally started as wheelchair athletes. And then eventually
wheelchair athletes only, yeah.
Yeah, and then in 1976, the Paralympics expanded to include competitors with other forms of disability. So it's cool to see where it's come from and how it's shaped. And I want to dive into, after swimming, no pun intended, but I want to dive into track and field, because we have one athlete that I think, there's plenty of athletes to talk about, of course, but there's one that I really want to highlight, and that's Hunter Woodhall. His wife is gold medal winning long jumper Tara Davis Woodhall. And I know I posted about it a lot on our stories. They have an incredible love story. Like and they had him mic'd up in the stands when she was jumping, and he was completely just the biggest cheerleader for her. Now, he is a previous Paralympian, having won silver and a bronze medal, but he recently tested positive for COVID. We know that happened to Noah Lyles in the Olympics, and the way that it works now is if the athlete can still compete, whether or not they've tested positive for COVID, they are able to do so if they can still compete.
We saw like Noah Lyles, who obviously contracted COVID after the 100 meter and still tried to do the 200 meter, even with his history of asthma, and still got a bronze, which is so remarkable. But I think Hunter should be hopefully cured by then. I think he's maybe a week or 2 out still, so
that'd be good. Yeah, it's I cheer for him, because I just think their story is so cool, and the fact that there are 2 Olympians out there competing and cheering each other on. And he had his legs amputated 11 months old because of a birth defect, and doctors weren't even sure if he would ever walk again. And here he is, just taking off and winning medals in Tokyo and in Rio, and I just think that's really, really cool.
Those doctors watching him at this point probably just can't believe their eyes what's happening.
It's cool. It's very, very cool. So I guess I want to talk about, we talked about Oksana Masters. We talked about competed in both the summer and the winter Paralympics. She and Erin Pike and Kendall Gretsch all competed in para-Nordic skiing in the Winter Games in Beijing in 2022. And now they're back in the Summer Games. Oksana Masters, paracycling, Erin Pike, para-track, and Kendall Gretsch, para-triathlon. So it's pretty impressive to see that they'll all be coming back. And Masters is the most decorated winter Paralympian of all time.
She dominates the winter and dominates the summer. There's no season she can't.
It's awesome. one other sport that's out that we need to, that's happening in this game, sorry, not out, happening in these games that always impresses the heck out of me in the Olympics. I have very intrigued to watch it in the Paralympics is table tennis, because that is a very intense sport that went from being a college bar game to like 100-mile-an-hour ping pong balls flying at your head.
Yeah, I think table tennis in the Summer Olympics we just watched, so fast, so intense. Like the ball goes so incredibly fast across the table, and now we've got the Paralympics jumping in there and competing with some of these impairments that they have, and it's incredible to see. I believe some guys actually use their mouth to hit the ball.
That's incredible.
So
just think about the breathing, right? Like when I'm in panic mode and I'm trying not to die, when I'm running or doing my athletic events, it's nose, mouth, all the things, right? So if you are having to just relearn how to breathe properly with both a paddle in your mouth, I mean, it's really, really impressive when you think about it. And one of the big names from the Team USA is table tennis player Leibovitz, who will be competing in his 7th Paralympic Games.
Number 7 is a lucky number for a few of our athletes, and hopefully they can bring home some more medals.
Yeah, it's incredible. Okay, as we come to wrap up on our time, is there anything you would like to cover that we have not talked about today?
I just want to highlight one more athlete for Team USA who's also got a pretty inspirational story. Abbas Karimi is returning for his 2nd Paralympic Games and first as a member of the United States. Born in Afghanistan, Karimi actually competed on the refugee Paralympic team in 2020. From Afghanistan to refugee team, now Team USA. So that's certainly someone to look out for, to cheer and get behind.
And swimming in the Paralympics. So keep an eye out for him in the pool.
Absolutely.
Very, very cool. Well, thank you for sharing all this great information with us. For those of you who are just as excited as we are, make sure you hit your GoldZone. Check out all these incredible athletes. The opening ceremonies happens on the Champs-Élysées in Paris, the main drag in Paris, if you will. So that'll be where the opening ceremonies are on the 28th. And competition starts on the 29th of August, which also happens to be the first day of college football week 1. So there's going to be a lot of action to catch up with. There's going to be a dent in my couch, and it runs through September. So that'll be right the last weekend. The last weekend of the Paralympics will be the beginning of NFL season. So lots to keep up with. And of course, we will have all of the things, all of the action for you at lastnightsgame.com. Of course, on the podcast next week, we're going to give you a season guide to the NFL season. Last week, we did a guide to the college football season. So you should be fully prepared for all things sports for the next couple of weeks.